let me know when you're ready, and I
I'm ready.
will start your 8 minutes. All right, you got 8 minutes starting now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in and watching the debates. Today, obviously, we're going to be debating against my argument. Now, to sum up my argument is all really contingent against the laws of logic and PSR, which is the principle of sufficient reasoning. Essentially, the principle of sufficient reasoning states that everything that exists, every contingent thing that exists, must have a sufficient reason as to why it is and why it is as it is rather than otherwise. Now, this is pretty much the root of my argument, and I frame my argument so that if you do affirm the PSR, then ultimately it would lead into the requirement of a necessary being. And the attributes that this necessary being would be required to have would be things such as being pure act, i.e. fully actual, that would be having the omni attributes and so on, as well as possessing consciousness in accordance to the principle of proportionate causality. Now, the argument goes as follows, as you guys can see with the syllogism. Premise 1, PSR teaches that every contingent being has sufficient reason why it is and why it is as it is rather than otherwise, which I've already stated. Premise 2 is contingent realities exist. Now, when I'm talking about contingency, something contingent, something whose existence is not necessarily / could have failed to exist or could be otherwise. It depends on something outside of itself for its being. For example, us humans, we would be an example of contingency. Certain attributes contingent beings have would be changing, potential, and so on. Premise 3 is the totality of contingent reality is itself contingent. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm just basically saying that contingent reality, like in its whole, if we just take the entirety of contingent reality, it's contingent. Premise 4 is no contingent thing, including any member of that totality, can be the sufficient reason of that totality. Now, as I stated with premise 1, with a contingent being needing a sufficient reasoning, if they are contingent, they aren't their own sufficient reason. So a contingent thing within this totality couldn't be its sufficient reason because it itself would need a sufficient reason. Premise 5, this leads on to premise 5, an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons would itself be contingent and thus unexplained, violating PSR. Now, this is to address the infinite regress, which is what some people hold to, which is the idea that there's every contingent being, there's a sufficient reason for that, and that also has a sufficient reason, and so on and so forth to infinity. Now, if we take an infinite regress, this is a violation of PSR because it doesn't actually justify anything. Instead, it just pushes the problem one step backwards over and over again, and that chain in its totality is still contingent. It's insufficient in itself. Because of that, an infinite regress, it would violate PSR and would be incompatible if you do affirm PSR. This is where we get into conclusion 1. Therefore, there must exist a necessary being outside the totality that is sufficient reason for the contingent totality. Now, something necessary is something that cannot not exist. It exists by its own nature and has no external cause or dependency. So its sufficient reason is grounded within itself. Premise 6, anything with potency is not necessary through itself and will require sufficient reason. Now, the reason that is with potential. Potential is a dependency, i.e. something that could exist otherwise. That's what a potential entails, right? So if you were to say that there's a necessary being, but it's not pure act, i.e. it has potential, it would need a sufficient reason as to why it has that potential. And as I said before, there can't be an infinite regress. So ultimately, there would need to be an ending sufficient reason. That's a necessary being that has no potential. Because of this, we get in conclusion 2, therefore the necessary being must be pure act. Now, premise 7, since the necessary being is the sufficient reason for all contingent reality, it is therefore the ultimate cause and sustainer of all that exists. I'm just restating essentially what has been established here. And conclusion 3, therefore the necessary being is the ultimate cause and creator of every contingent thing that exists. Premise 8, humans are conscious beings possessing intellect and will. This is the part of the argument in which I now argue that the necessary being would have to be conscious. Premise 9, according to the principle of proportionate causality, the effect must pre-exist in its cause either formally, virtually, or immanently. Now, this is just that premise right there states what the principle of proportionate causality is. If for here something formally, it just means you possess its exact matter. So let's say if the effect has X, and the cause formally produced that effect, X, then the cause actually just has X, possesses it. Virtually is to have the power or capacity to produce it either from using an external source, like a potter using clay, or by possessing it in potentia. So, for example, a potter can virtually create the effect of a pot by using the external source from it, that being the clay. And then eminently is to possess in a higher or superior way. Something that's ontologically superior is just something that gives the most capability while having the less or zero dependencies or contingencies. Ultimately, the most ontologically superior thing is something's automatically ontologically superior or eminent if it possesses no dependencies or contingencies. Premise 10, since consciousness exists in human beings and the first mover is the ultimate cause of all being, it must possess consciousness eminently, formally, or virtually. This is just to go upon this, and in accordance to PSR, if you were to posit that humans were conscious and this did not come from the necessary being, then A, you'd be violating some premises over here, but B, you'd be violating PSR because this would be a brute fact. The sufficient reason for consciousness and where it came from would be coming from nothing. Therefore, the first cause possesses consciousness formally, virtually, or eminently. Now, premise 11, but virtual possession implies potentiality. It's either because, as I stated here with what we understand virtual to mean, it's either in the sense of potential or using an external source. If you take it with the external source route, then that external source would need to be have a sufficient reason for existence and ultimately need a necessary being. So this is completely ruled out of the scenario. So the only other sense you could say virtually is via potentia, which once again doesn't work because the necessary being can't have potentia. Therefore, the first mover cannot possess consciousness virtually.
Just under a minute.
Premise 12, only a being that is itself conscious can possess consciousness in this way. Therefore, the first mover must be conscious. Now, the reason I hold to a formal position of consciousness is even then I can grant an consciousness eminently, but to possess consciousness in a higher, more superior way doesn't make much sense because consciousness is just means to possess awareness, intellect, and will. Awareness is to know what something is. Intellect is the power ability to know universals, essences, immaterial truths, and will is the ability to power to choose between two things. There isn't an eminent form of these things because they're just abilities. They're just capped out. So that's why it results with the conclusion. Therefore, the first mover must be conscious, and this fully actualized conscious first mover is what we call God. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank Taco for setting up and hosting the debate. I want to thank Bug for his participation and presentation of the argument. And I want to thank the audience for their continued support. Point of order, the opinions presented here are my own and not meant to represent Taco or any of the panelists, this channel, or its community. So first is there's many variations of the PSR as to which facts require sufficient explanation, what constitutes a sufficient, or what requires sufficient reason and what constitutes sufficient reason, and which modal scope or register the PSR is utilizing. Now, the version Bug seems to be alluding to is that for each contingent fact P, there obtains another fact Q such that Q explains P. That is to say, P and Q stand in explanatory relation where P is an explanandum and Q is explanans. However, this principle seems to be inadequately justified and suffers from plausible counterexamples. The PSR seemingly must at least accommodate indeterminacy or stochastic processes. The main argument I've seen in support of these versions, contingency versions of the PSR, is to exclude certain skeptical scenarios elicited from brute facts, of which this kind of PSR is going to exclude. So it's if there's brute facts, you can't know anything sort of stuff. However, there's not really any version of the PSR that can establish the impossibility of skeptical scenarios. Furthermore, the skepticism of which the PSR would exclude could easily be diffused from a defeasible presumption in favor of an explanation of contingent facts, such that the burden of proof would be on the skeptic to provide defeaters to that presumption. So we sort of have to talk about what contingency is. So for me, I would analyze it. P is contingent if and only if possibly P and possibly not P, or equivalently not necessarily P or necessarily not P. And so used in the traditional classical possible world semantics, it would mean that P obtains in some possible worlds and does not obtain in some other possible worlds. Now, if this is like logical modality, then necessarily P would mean like not P entails some sort of contradiction, and that possibly P or possibly not P would not entail contradiction. So I'm unclear about what the modal scope of the argument is, and it's also unclear what metaphysics of modality is being deployed, whether it's like concrete possible worlds or just abstract or representational, conceptual. I'd also remark that like the totality of all contingent facts, like the BCCF, or like you group them all up sort of thing. Like, I don't know if this is what he's alluding to with contingent reality exists, but if itself is considered to be a contingent fact, that would imply immediately that the totality would either be a member, an element, or a mereological component of itself. And those sorts of compositions are notoriously problematic. And in fact, there are mathematical axioms employed to prevent these sorts of constructions. You can think of regularity and foundation. We should also be careful not to commit the fallacy of composition. For example, from the fact that every individual human has a mom, it would not follow that humanity itself has a mother. The argument also has to make use of like a lot of infinity hater moves to rule out alternatives, and so that's going to cut against the plausibility of the argument. One thought is like it would seem reasonable to explain every conjunct of the totality from citing other conjuncts. So, for example, how do you get the coffee cup from the plastic from the oil on the ground from biological matter that died, and then you just keep giving explanations in terms of other contingent things all the way back to infinity, plausibly some sort of inflationary cosmos. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that explanation. Nothing's left out or needs to be explained such that the principle has straightforward, plausible counterexamples. Another is one assumption of the argument seems to be an Aristotelian metaphysics, which is questionable, that faces problems of circularity, implausibility, and inadequate justification. And even if there were initial contingent facts that did require an explanation, it seems plausible to cite non-causal explanations that don't cite the activities of a being. We could consider explanations in terms of grounding or functional realization or structural constraints, metaphysical principles, etc. For example, we could consider a world in which there is a law that says, let there be an atom, or a law that says, let there be a 50-50 probability of there being an atom. This law could have been false, such that the atom's contingent, but there would be a contingent being without a necessary being, because a law is not a being, but rather just the nomology of the world. I would object also to the principle of proportionate causality because of the plausibility of emergence. So many composite objects are observed to have properties that their parts do not. So like intelligent beings are sometimes composed of non-intelligent matter. Wetness and other macroscopic properties are not predicated of subatomic particles. And so the PPC sort of relies on the denial of emergence, which is very contested. And another move a non-theist could make is to say, well, you could grant that something exists necessarily that causes something contingent, such as the singularity or some other event having a probability of unity. That is to say, like 100% this event has to happen sort of thing. Like those would be like necessary under most accounts of modal logic or modal metaphysics. Every contemporary proponent of cosmological arguments recognize that additional arguments are required to show that the entity whose existence is established possesses the familiar divine attributes. And my appraisal of cosmological arguments is that they're parasitic on ontological arguments, such that if the cosmological argument is sound or strong evidence, then the ontological argument is sound. Premise 2 would be that the ontological argument is unsound, such that the cosmological argument is unsound from Modus Tollens 1-2. Finally, the structure of the argument presented seems to be invalid, although being charitably, we may suppose to be able to reconstruct the argument in a valid form. So I'm not sure how much we'll press on that. So one thing is like this Aristotelian metaphysics stuff, right? So one is like the problem, like the goal of an analysis of change, because he's going for like this potential actual stuff. So like the goal of an analysis of change is to explain becoming, coming to be, passing to and from, transitions, or other so-called change language. But the Aristotelian analysis explicates actuality and potentiality with the change language its attempts to render an analysis of. So like potentials becoming actual, or potentials coming to be actualized, or things passing from potential beings to actual beings, or transitions from potency to act. So it just seems confused as an analysis. It's also implausible because it assumes ontological pluralism, things that aren't necessarily existent nor non-existent, which almost no metaphysician accepts. It also assumes the felicity of eternalism, which is a very strong position in theories of time. And it's also unparsimonious by introducing uncountably infinite potentials for every single object. And there's also inadequate justification. There's just no good reasons to accept the analysis, and there's readily available plausible alternatives such as x changes if and only if at f at time t, if x is f at time t naught and not f at time t1, and x persists from t naught to t1, or the at theory of change. And I have a bunch of other objections to the metaphysics and the validity, but I guess we'll get into that because I'm running out of time. But ideally, if we have some time left over, if people donate, I actually would like to make arguments against the doctrine of divine simplicity from in the bounds of Christianity, because I think there's problems even within the system itself. And with that, I yield the rest of my 2 seconds.
Perfectly timed. Thank you so much for the great introductions, both of y'all. Let me get you pulled back up here. So, for tonight's debate, as usual,
You there, Buggy?
and Karen Dave says, I very much want to hear a deeper analysis, WRT, divine simplicity, so I shall add some time. Good luck, debaters. Thank you so much for the comment, Karen, and the $10. That's greatly appreciated. I'll add the time now.
You there?
Because you're the one bringing the objection, so.
Yeah. So, yeah. So let's talk about the argument and what's going on, and let's figure this thing out together. We're going to work together as a team. So, so do you think you can give like a more formal analysis of like, well, you said the PSR is everything that exists has a sufficient reason why it is, and why it is as it is rather than otherwise. Is that
so? My definition for PSR that was that every yeah, we'll just start with that.
so? Like X exists has like a sufficient reason for its existence and its essence. I assume that's what you mean by like what it is, or do you mean like something else?
Say that again. Sorry.
When you say like why it is and why it's not otherwise, do you mean like why it has an essence or something?
I by that I mean there's a sufficient reasoning as to like why it exists in this way it does.
Like its mode of existence,
and why it does exist rather than not exist.
Yeah. Like it has a reason for why it exists, but you also added like why it is as it is rather than otherwise. But so would you say that God has a sufficient reason as to why it exists and why it is as it is rather than otherwise? Are you including like everything?
Yeah. I would affirm that God has a sufficient reason why he exists. Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that if God has a sufficient reason as to why he exists, then the ontological argument is sound?
What do you mean by the ontological argument?
So the ontological argument is that so God has a sufficient reason why he exists. In other words, an explanation for his existence. So really the only where you can go from there is sort of like an ontological argument where God's existence is a part of his essence. Some might say his existence is his essence, or they might say something like his attributes sort of entail his existence. Would you affirm either of those?
I would affirm that like the sufficient reason for God is internal versus with contingent things it's external.
Yeah, so like would those internal reasons be either that his he has existence essentially, or that any of his properties would entail his existence?
Essence is existence.
Okay, his essence is. Thank you. Okay. Contingent reality exists. Let's talk about this. So a lot of times you're just trying to like collect everything or group everything together because you don't want to run into the issue where you're saying, well, what explains X? And I say X0, and I say, well, X1. You say, well, what explains that? And I say X2. And then, because that's sort of going to end the argument. So are you trying to sort of collect all of the contingent objects or contingencies or contingent facts in like this amalgamation of them or something?
Are you in reference to premise 2 or premise 3? Because premise 2 is contingent reality exists. Premise 3 is the totality of contingent realities is itself contingent.
Contingent reality exists. Oh, so premise 2, you're just saying, yeah, what do you mean? Are you saying like there's at least one contingent object, or are you saying something?
There's just contingent things that do exist.
Okay, so it's like at least one contingent. So what language would you like to use? Are you saying like an object or like a being or a fact? Is there any particular language you like to use for this?
I mean, just so not.
I mean,
really.
it says
like,
being.
You could just say something that's contingent.
Okay, anything that's contingent, whatever it is. Okay.
Yeah, that would be part of the contingent reality. Anything that exists is contingent.
And I take it that when you say like the totality of contingent of CR, that's sort of like maybe like a set containing all contingent things, like a collection of them, like C1, C2, C3.
Yeah. Like if you imagine, let's say there's 5 contingent things, the totality of that contingent reality is just those 5 contingent things because they're all that they make up the entirety of the contingent reality.
Yeah, that's actually probably an easier way to look at it. Instead of dealing with infinites, we can just say, well, there's at least 5 contingent objects. Let's look at these. When you say, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is when you say is premise 3 where it itself is contingent. So would that be so it seems to like include itself, because if CR is contingent, then it's an element in the set of contingent things, right?
When I'm saying what I'm saying there with premise 3 is that like if you take the totality of the contingent reality, like those five contingent things, for example, that totality it's self-contingent. Like it doesn't just magically become necessary.
Right, but I'm just asking, does this set include itself as an element? So like let's say CR is the set of C1, C2, and C3. My question is, would you say that CR is the set including CR and C1, C2, C3?
No, like what I'm just saying there is like, imagine there's like 5 dots, and those are all the contingent things, and there's a circle around them. That's the contingent reality. What I'm saying there is with that contingent reality is it's self-contingent. I mean that entire thing, it's that reality, it's still contingent. It doesn't like become necessary.
So like let's say we were collecting a collection of all the contingent things. Would contingent reality be one of those things that we would include?
No, that's not how I'm necessarily using contingent reality. Like if there's contingent beings or things that which exist, like a contingent reality, that's just like the term I'm using to describe all those things, all those contingent things. Like if I was trying to lump them into one thing.
Yeah, I understand that. But when you said it itself is contingent.
Yeah, by that I mean like that clump that I made, that like conceptual clump where I clumped up all the contingent things, like all of contingent reality, all those contingent things are contingent.
But not the set itself? Like contingent reality itself? Or are you just saying?
Well, I'm not saying that like here the contingent reality is like its own existing thing. I get you could say it exists in the sense that there's contingent things that exist, and it's like that's a reality. You could kind of try to argue that, but all I'm saying is like all those contingent things, that would be the contingent reality, and those contingent things are contingent.
Yeah, I get that. I'm stuck on premise 3 where you're saying CR, like the set of all these contingent things, is itself contingent, right? I'm trying to make sense of that, and it
Yeah,
seems
all I'm
as
saying,
though,
there's that clump of contingent things. Those contingent things are contingent.
so you're just saying the things within that are contingent,
Yeah.
but the set itself is not contingent. Like the collection of the contingent things
Yeah.
is not itself contingent. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like how, for example, if we take with contingent reality, if we take like the solar system exists, but it exists like as a system of bodies, as those planets. So it's just like the solar system is just the description for the clump of those bodies, the planets, in its totality. Same thing with the contingent reality. That's just like it exists, but it's just like the description of all the contingent things itself. The same way with
Okay.
like the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom exists not like as an actual substance, but as like the clumping of like all the animals.
Okay, so like the set of animals is not itself an animal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then you said, okay, number 4, no contingent thing can be the sufficient reason of CR.
Yeah.
So if what you're saying is true, like CR is just this collection of C1, C2, C3, and it doesn't contain itself, it seems to be explained by its elements. So like, if I'm thinking like in
What I
set
mean
theoretic,
by sufficient what do you mean it seems to explain its elements? Like in the sense of sufficient reason.
So like explanations, one type of explanation is like an ontological explanation where the set containing the number 1 is explained in virtue of the fact that the number 1 exists. You see what I'm saying? Like, so like if it's the case that CR is a collection of C1, C2, and C3, CR seems to be explained by the fact that C1 and C2 and C3 obtain.
Sorry, say that one again.
So would you agree that the set containing the number 1 is explained by the number 1? Like one way of saying it is like the set containing the number 1 exists in virtue of the fact that the number 1 exists.
Well, like the set, when we're talking about the set, like let's take like the number 1 in the sense as like an actual like substance. Like the same thing with what I said with the animal kingdom, right? The animal kingdom, like that thing itself isn't like a substance that exists. It just describes the set of like all the animals, right? You could say it's like something, it's conceptual.
Do you think it's explained by its like members? Like humanity is explained by humans?
You could say like it explains what's within the set. Like the contingent reality just it's the it explains the contingent things in the sense that it just says that there's contingent things that exist, or these things within it are contingent.
Let's say I have
It wouldn't be like the explanation in the sense of PSR, because there's not like a grounding reason as to like where did these contingent things come from and why like do they exist as they do. All it is like it's the same thing as saying like a contingent being is just calling it contingent. Like that doesn't explain the contingent being. It's just like explaining an observation.
Right. But I'm not trying to explain the elements. I'm just trying to explain the totality. So like think of a bowl of grapes and I have like a collection of grapes. Do you think that collection of grapes is explained by the grapes?
That collection of grape, what do you mean by explain here?
Well, I guess I should ask what do you mean by explain, because you're using like a PSR such that for every fact or thing that obtains, there's a sufficient reason, right? So like let's say I have a thing and that thing is a bowl of grapes. Do you think that bowl, like the collection of grapes, is explained by the grapes? Like let's say I have one grape over here and one grape over there and I put them together. Do you think that collection of 2 grapes is explained by each of those individual grapes or not?
No, that wouldn't be like an explanation. Like it wouldn't be like a sufficient reasoning in a sense. It would be an explanation in the sense of like you're explaining that this grape is a grape, but it's not a sufficient reason in the sense that like where like the source of the grape's existence, and where's the grape come from? What's the grape grounded in?
I'm not trying to explain the grape. I'm trying to explain the collection. Like I just put two grapes together and I try to explain the collection. Do you think that the collection
just being grapes?
I'm asking if the collection is explained by the individual grapes, or is it explained by something else?
Is the collection of grapes explained by the individual grapes? Well,
yeah.
I mean, you could say in some sense, like if the collection is just describing what's within it, and it's just grapes within it, then the grapes themselves are explaining the collection.
Okay.
Like in that kind of sense. But that's not like a sufficient reason. That doesn't tell you why those grapes exist, where they came from, those types of things. It's like just an observation, essentially.
Okay, so let's say like the fact that there's a grape in a bowl, do you think me putting the bowl, like the grape in the bowl, explains why the grape is in the bowl, or do you think like that needs more explanation?
Yeah. So what would need to be explained, like a sufficient reasoning is like explain would be a sufficient reason. There's a couple things that it gives. It gives the complete set of conditions, like the full ground. It's like the ultimate basis. There's nothing left unexplained about why the thing exists, like where it comes from. It's like it's the ultimate grounding of its existence.
Oh, so would you say like an explanation is sort of like I forget the science guy just says, well, in order to create apple pie, you must first invent the universe. Is that sort of like what you take an explanation to be?
That would be like the ultimate sufficient reasoning for those things. Like that could be an example in a larger term. Obviously, I don't believe the universe is a necessary being, but you get what I'm trying to say there. There's explanations in the sense like you can have an explanation in general with like the collection here where it's just like partial or incomplete, right? Like it explains what's in the collection or what this thing is, but like it's not the sufficient reasoning as to why this thing exists, like where it came from, what created it, so on.
So
I guess it doesn't ground the grape's existence. It just describes what the grape is. It's an observation.
So would you say like if I see it's raining, or like let's say I see it's wet on the ground, then I try to cite that it having rained is why the ground is wet. You would say, well, really that explanation is insufficient unless you cite God.
With rain hitting the ground, the only way to explain it is with God.
Yeah, because you're saying, well, it's not sufficient. You need to explain everything about everything in order to have a sufficient explanation. So I'm asking if the water's on the ground, would I have to cite God in an explanation?
If for it to be the ultimate sufficient reason, yes. In the sense that I'm talking about here, there's two senses you could use sufficient reasons. There could be sufficient reasons in like ordinary situations, like for example, the flame can be the sufficient reason as to why the paper burns. Like, why did the paper get burnt? Why did it turn that ash? Well, because it was set on fire. It was from the flame. But there's only one ultimate sufficient reason, that being like the thing that grounds everything else, and it doesn't itself have another sufficient reason why it exists. Like it is its essence is existence.
Okay. And I'd have to sort of also cite everything in between, like all of the processes that led to the rain, all the way back to the creation of or the creation of creation, I should say, and then of God's like creative free. Okay.
Yeah. So like PSR is that it's just saying that something requires a sufficient reason by referencing something prior to it or by its necessity.
Right, but you're just taking unless they give the entire explanatory chain, it's not going to be
for the one
sufficient
ultimate
explanation.
Sufficient reason.
Right.
Once again, like there's different senses.
And Kurt has a question: does a complete explanation require and thank you so much, Kurt. but does a complete explanation require a teleology, or is final and efficient causation adequate for Bug?
Yeah. Well, like, I don't see how, like, what does he mean by required teleology?
I'm guessing if he asks if you affirm, I guess, Aristotelian causation, where you have
I
formal,
affirm
material,
Aristotelian.
efficient, and teleal or teleological or whatever.
Yeah. Well, like, so, like, for PSR, right? Just to clarify, teleology, all teleology is like the idea that things within nature act for purposes or goals, and that's like excluding whether they're conscious or not. This you could
Kurt clarified. He says, I meant efficient and proximate.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Something. I meant efficient and proximate. Yeah. You could say in some, it wouldn't be the ultimate explanation. Teleology wouldn't be the ultimate explanation or sufficient reason. You could say that, like, it could be in some sense like a sufficient reason as to why this, like, X carried out the action of Y. So, like, let's say X did something and that something is Y. Like, teleology could be this sufficient explanation as to why X did Y, but it wouldn't be like the sufficient explanation it's like this one ultimate sufficient explanation, because it doesn't explain why X exists entirely, where X is grounded in with, like, its ultimate sources, those types of things. It wouldn't even, like, teleology itself would, like, if we take teleology to be like an actual thing, it itself would also need a sufficient reason as well, if you take that worldview.
So now I'm on premise 5, where it says an infinite regress of sufficient reasons would itself be contingent. So is that another sort of another collection, but a different collection than the contingent reality?
No, so what I'm saying here is, with the infinite regress thing, it's in reference to the idea that, as I said before, like, everything has sufficient reasons, but as to why it exists as it is, in the way that it does. The infinite regress is essentially like X. Let's say X is a contingent thing, and then its grounded or its sufficient reason is Y, and then that Y is Z, and so on to infinity, right? I would affirm that this isn't a sufficient reason, and infinite regress would be a violation of PSR, because ultimately that chain in its totality is ultimately contingent and wouldn't be the sufficient reason. It just kind of pushes back this the sufficient reason one step further infinitely, and it doesn't justify the thing. So, like, in its totality, it's ultimately unjustified.
So what's strange about this now is because you said, well, X explaining Y doesn't really explain Y, because Y, for a sufficient explanation, you sort of have to cite everything, right? So I'm not sure how there could even be chains of explanation, because let's say, like, we're trying to
No,
explain.
I'm not saying that for X to explain Y, it has to be the explanation of everything. That's for the one ultimate sufficient reasons. The sufficient reasoning, like, as I said, there's ordinary sufficient reasonings, and then there's, in the sense of, like, the one ultimate sufficient reason. All a sufficient reason is something requires sufficient reasoning by referencing something prior to it or by its necessity. So, for example, as I said with the paper, the reason the paper became ash, the sufficient reason for that is because it burned, or because of the flame. The flame burned it, right? That's, like, ordinary sufficient reason. Then there's the one ultimate sufficient reason. That would be the sufficient reason that grounds all of existence. Not a sufficient reason doesn't have to be the ultimate sufficient reasoning to be the sufficient reasoning. Like, i.e., for Y to be the sufficient reason for X, it doesn't need to be the explanation of everything in the universe. It just needs to be the sufficient reason for X.
So when you
Y
say
can have its sufficient reasoning itself.
so when your argument
i.e.
uses
Mhm.
when your argument
Yes,
uses the phrase sufficient reason, are you referring to like the immediate reason, or when you say sufficient
Well,
reason in the
all the
argument, do you
sufficient
mean
reasoning is it's referent. It's something that prior to it that explains why it is as it is.
would that include everything to be sufficient?
Would that sufficient reason need to include for example, let's say
For all the reasons,
like
I remember when you cite anything for it to be sufficient, do you need to cite God?
well for the entirety of existence to be sufficient, there would have to be like an ultimate sufficient reasoning. But let's say
No, I'm saying just for like a little thing. Yeah, the
great
grape. Do I need to cite
sufficient
God
for any sufficient reason? It doesn't. You don't need to cite
for that
God.
to be
Like,
a sufficient reason?
example,
Okay.
for the paper turning into ash, the sufficient reasoning for that would be the flame that burned it.
So I can so like when I go back to my example and I say, well, the ground is wet because it rained. So would that be you saying that now
that
that's
would be a sufficient
reason?
reason.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But that wouldn't be ultimately there would need the totality of existence would need a sufficient reason, or like the universe, and that would ultimately require God. But there can be sufficient reasonings in the sense of like the ground is wet because it rained, or the paper became ash because the flame burned it.
Okay. So now we're looking at the infinite regress. So let's say I have, C1, C2, C3 all the way back to infinity, like an infinite past model, where C1 is explained by C2, C2 is explained by C3, and you're saying that the chain C1 to C infinity is contingent.
Yeah, it's
right?
ultimately so if you're taking an infinite regress of sufficient reasons, then it's either claiming that everything in that chain is contingent, or you could also claim that everything is necessary. So with an infinite regress of contingent causes, right, that chain, if you take it just to be an infinite regress of contingent causes, is ultimately contingent, as that's what we would affirm if you do affirm premise 3 and premise 4, that the totality of contingent reality is itself contingent. Sorry, just premise 3. That ultimate chain is contingent. It's not the ultimate sufficient reasoning. All it's doing is just pushing the sufficient reasoning back to a previous contingent thing over and over again. There's no like ultimate grounding. Or you could take the worldview where there's an infinite regress, but it's everything in there is necessary. If you're taking that worldview, as the guy in my chat said with imperfect, everything, if for something to be necessary, right, it has to exist as it does in all possible worlds, which means that things such as like atom division, or like even, for example, us talking, we would be violating that because we went from a state of not talking to talking. Those would be changes. So we wouldn't be necessary, would be qualified as necessary. As well as, for example, us growing, that's a change. Needs to be a sufficient reasoning as to why that occurs. We're also dependent on air and those types of things. There's sufficient reasonings within that. So the idea that everything's necessary wouldn't work out, and the idea that this infinite regress of contingent causes would just ultimately be contingent. It doesn't justify or ground anything.
All right. Seems a little confusing. That's not even what I was saying, but it's interesting. You're saying that necessitarianism entails, what exactly you think necessitarianism entails? A violation of the PSR?
No, like if you take that everything is necessary.
Yeah, that's necessitarianism. Or fatalism, I guess some people call it.
Yeah. If you're taking everything exists as necessary, then that wouldn't follow, because
from change. You're saying that change and necessitarianism are incompatible?
I'm saying that just the current world and necessitarianism is incompatible, because something necessary is something that cannot not exist. And if it were to, like, for example, with us, change would be an aspect that would reject necessity, because that we exist in a possible world in which we don't have to exist in that specific mode. We can exist in different ways, which then means if we're claiming to be necessary, right? Let's say X is necessary. X must exist in all possible worlds. But if X can be different and exist in a possible world, then X isn't necessary. So since we are existing
Yeah, but
differently,
necessitarian,
then we couldn't be necessary.
like the point of necessitarianism is just to say that the only possible world is the actual world. That's the position. So when you refer to other possible worlds,
that everything's necessary.
Yeah, and I'm telling you what that means in possible world semantics is just to say that the actual world is the only possible world. That's what they mean.
Yeah. Okay. And then you're taking a possible world in which we can, are you affirming that we're necessary beings too?
No, I'm just trying to understand your qualms with necessitarianism. I thought it was sort of interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we could get back to the argument if it's sort of like, it's probably off topic. We should probably get back to the thing anyway. But
yeah, sure, whatever you want.
So this chain of contingent beings or facts or objects, you don't think that the chain is explained by its like members?
It wouldn't be there wouldn't be an ultimate explanation. All it's doing is pushing it back, the sufficient reasoning back one step behind it infinitely, just so X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E forever. It ultimately isn't grounding the totality of the chain. The totality of the chain is still contingent.
Right, I'm just saying, like, when I take a collection of things, to me, like, the collection is explained by its elements.
The collections explain.
Yeah.
How would that like?
I'm not sure what else could explain it.
What I said. Because what I'm saying here is, with an infinite regress of contingent things, that infinite regress in its totality is still contingent. It's not. It wouldn't be a sufficient reason. So, like, how is what you just said like debunk or like give a possible explanation as to
you're
how
saying,
it can be?
You're saying, well, the set of this contingent chain is itself contingent, and you're saying, well, like, it needs an explanation, and it just seems to be, at least immediately intuitive to me, that collections are explained by their elements.
Well, collections in the sense, like, you can have the collection
or sets or whatever you want to call it
of like the totality of contingent reality. All that collection is explaining there that everything within inside of it is contingent, but it's not the sufficient reasoning. It wouldn't be a sufficient reason. It's just like a description. It's not.
No, I'm trying to explain the set.
Explain why this contingent, let's say within the contingent reality, why X, Y, and Z exist. It's not grounding that. It's literally just describing that X, Y, and Z are contingent.
No, I'm not saying this. I'm not saying the set explains the elements. I'm saying the elements can explain the set.
Okay, PSR is not the same as explaining a set. PSR is just referencing the grounding for a thing's existence.
Okay, I guess we could talk about
something prior
definitions.
To it that grounds its existence.
All right, I guess we can start getting into definitions and analysis. So what do you mean when you say grounding? What does that mean?
By grounding?
Like if P grounds Q and P is the fundans or the fundatia and Q is the fundatum or fundata. What is that relation to you?
Yeah, so like if you want to take the philosophical definition, I'll write it out for the stream too. Grounding is the relationship in which one thing exists, obtains, or is true because of something deeper or more fundamental. Or like you could also, that's just basically saying, another way you could word it, just grounding is just the relation of metaphysical dependence in which one fact obtains in virtue of another. More fundamental.
All right, that's pretty close. So when I think of a set, of, or a collection of objects, I think that obtains in virtue of the fact of each of its individual members or constitutive components, like mereological or ontological dependence.
That's what you're taking grounding to mean?
In this context, so like one type of plausible grounding explanation is the sandcastle in the sand. It seems to me as though the sandcastle is obtained in virtue of the fact that there's sand.
That like
So like the parts explain the
for
whole.
the same thing, it would be like this,
Or the
if there's a
the
marble
whole is dependent
statue,
upon the parts.
the marble statue exists in virtue of the marble being shaped in that form,
Yeah.
and because the marble is more fundamental. Yeah, that's just what I described.
Okay.
The
So when I
statue's
take a
existence is grounded in the marble, and then the marble would have its own grounding for its existence, and so on and so forth.
yeah, so when I take like a collection, then that would just be grounded in its parts. Like the sandcastle is grounded in the sand, and the marble statue is grounded in at least partially,
being
grounded
shaped.
in the marble. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you could even say like the intentions of the artist and a bunch of other stuff, but at least partially
Mhm.
grounded in its components.
Yeah.
And so when you say, well, there's this chain of like contingent things, then you're saying what explains the chain? I mean, it has like these elements as components of it.
Basically what I'm saying here, it's not necessarily. I guess you could say what explains the chain, but like
Or what grounds
ultimately,
the chain, I guess.
This chain can't just be an infinite regress of previous contingent things. There would have to be an ultimate, like an end to that, and that would be a necessary being.
Okay.
And I believe like I've already explained this.
Oh.
I think, didn't I already address this argument from you?
I'm not sure. So what was your response to there being an infinite chain of contingent beings or facts?
Yeah. If there's an infinite regress of just contingent reasons, that just there's sufficient reasoning is another reason before that, and so on, that's contingent. The ultimate chain, the chain in its totality is ultimately contingent. So it's not grounding or explaining anything. So
Yeah.
it would violate PSR. It's just
I'm not saying like the chain explains each of its components. I'm saying the components explain the chain or ground the chain. Like the chain obtains in virtue of the fact of each of its components.
Though. That's not how that wouldn't be a sufficient reason in within like PSR sense. That's just describing the chain. Like the same thing with the animal kingdom and the animals, right? Like the animal kingdom just exists conceptually. It's not it's not.
Yeah, but you're
thing, it's
asking
just a
like
description.
You're asking what grounds or explains or is the sufficient reason for the collection, and I'm saying it's the
animal
members.
kingdom right there, right? It's just it's like the name for the totality of the animals, but it isn't the sufficient reason or explanation why, like, let's say this zebra exists, like what grounds the zebra's existence or what grounds this lion's existence. All it's saying is that the zebra and the lion are animals.
Yeah, but you're saying, well, what explains the collection? And I'm saying it's the members. Maybe we should move on because I think maybe we're talking past each other a little bit on this point. Because we're on a timer, you know.
Yeah, whatever you want to.
Therefore, there must exist a necessary being. So, one of my responses to it being a necessary being was there's other sufficient reasons on the table other than beings. Options on the table is like non-causal explanation, or like like a non-causal explanation, because like a being explaining a being is like concrete and causal, but you could have stuff like explanations in terms of grounding or functional realization or logical or structural constraints or essentialist explanations.
Sufficient reasoning would be in reference to what grounds it, something. That would be a sufficient reason, and it's the thing that it would be prior. So like like let's say X. The sufficient reasoning for X would be Y, and Y is prior to X, and Y is what grounds X. It's all sufficient reasoning.
Yeah, I'm just saying like there's non-causal reasons or explanations on the table that are not from beings or the activities of beings.
How would this like make it so that there can be a contingent reality that isn't ultimately grounded in necessary being?
Yeah, there could be a sufficient reason or explanation that's non-causal.
Like what? Like, okay, so then how did these things come
Like
to be?
grounding or functional realization or logical or structural constraints. Like again, like
Okay,
an
like,
example, a
so
silly
if it's
example would be like
non-causal,
there's
well, real quickly, if it's non-causal, then like how? And so instead of replacing the necessary being here, it's like that explanation is like it's a non-causal explanation, right? Then
Mhm.
how did these things come to exist?
Let me ask. Let's start with this. Do you accept? Well, I mean, you have to because you just accepted grounding. Maybe you have a different understanding of grounding, but do you accept that there are non-causal explanations?
What would be an example?
So a non-causal explanation is like a fact that obtains in virtue of another fact that don't stand in causal relation. So like the fact that 4 is even or something like that.
The fact that 4 is even is non-causal. Well, the sufficient reasoning would just be with like this system of mathematics or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say like 2 exists or like it's sort of strange like because I mean it's going to depend like on your axioms or whatever, but you could say, well, 3 exists because 2 exists, and then the succession operator exists, and it seems pretty. Most people take that there is explanations for like mathematical facts, right? It's like not all of these facts are like independent and brute. Most people take it that facts about mathematics are derivable or deducible from other facts, like Euclid's elements. You get your 5,
Yeah. So
whatever,
real
and then you
quickly,
can
I
create all
was
your circles and
yeah.
stuff.
Well, I originally asked you like how something non-causal, like replacing the necessary being here, could explain the existence. Could be the sufficient explanation for the existence of all these things. Like what caused these things to exist?
Right, and I was just asking if you accepted any non-causal explanations for anything.
Well,
Like, do you think the
like
activity of a
that's kind of a red herring because it doesn't address my question.
Okay, so I mean, if you do accept non-causal explanations, then I'm just going to cite it as a non-causal explanation.
Yeah, I was asking for an example. Like, if you posit
4
a
being
non-causal
even.
explanation, then I'm just asking you. Then, what created these contingent realities? What created them? Since it's the thing that was supposedly creates them, at least within my worldview, that necessary being is being replaced with something that's non-causal. It doesn't create.
Well, I guess
Are
you're
you
not a
affirming a brute
Thomist. It was
fact
funny
there?
as, huh?
Are you affirming like they
Well,
just exist because they do?
I affirm that there are brute facts, but I'm just saying I'm just rolling with the argument, and I'm saying that there's non-causal explanations that don't cite the activities of beings to explain facts.
And then
Like
what would be
the
the
fact that 4
explanation
is
for these things
even.
being created then? Like if it wasn't caught, if the
I'd
necessary
like
being
again.
was
There's lots of options on the table: grounding, functional realization, logical or structural constraints, or essentialist explanations.
yeah. So
And
let's
you'd have
start.
to, and it's sort of
Pick
the
one.
onus is on you to sort of rule all of them out. Okay, rule out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we can start with grounding. What rules out a grounding explanation?
Well, okay. How would a grounding explanation like explain how if there's a necessary beings replaced with like a non-causal sufficient reasoning, how things can be created? Like what created everything else? How does grounding explain that?
Well, I mean that's sort of a question. You're supposed to be providing an argument to prove that
What
grounding is
I asked you
impossible.
originally was the explanation where if you didn't have a necessary being and it was just a non-causal sufficient reasoning, I was
Mhm.
asking you to explain then how that everything was created.
Well, if it's the case that everything is created, it could be explained in terms of grounding. I'm not sure why that couldn't
How
be the
would
case.
grounding explain, like, for example, like how everything was created?
I mean, I don't have to, but just for fun, I could cite Parmenides' metaphysical explanation: is that what is and what is not is unthinkable. Like nothing can't exist. So
How
something
does
has
it
to
explain
exist.
what created these things?
It explains why why things exist. Is that it? Nothingness can't exist. So something has to exist. That explains it.
Okay, but that could be a necessary being. That like that
That's
doesn't
a
explain why. Like,
that's a
okay,
no
so
no
the
no no
one
no.
thing, even within your worldview, right? The one thing that
This
has
isn't
to
my
exist.
worldview, by the way,
Well,
but
like with the hypothetical, that one thing could
yeah.
be the non-causal thing. That so that explanation there, it doesn't explain how everything was created given the non-causal like sufficient reason that you provided.
No, I'm just saying. I'm just citing a grounding
Well, that's what I
explanation
was
for why
asking
things could
you.
exist.
So like if I'm
So the
asking this
grounding
question and you're
explanation for why
answering something,
things
but it doesn't answer the question, then it's just like a red herring. You know what I mean?
non-causal explanations are on the table. One of them, among many, is a grounding explanation. An example of like a metaphysical grounding explanation is that of like Parmenides, who would say that being is and non-being is unthinkable, and so it's the case of metaphysical necessity that things exist, and that explains why things
Yeah,
exist is
at
because
least
it's
one thing
necessary for them to
exists.
exist.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
shows that at least one thing needs to exist. So
yeah.
that wouldn't explain why, like, so for example, within this hypothetical, right, you're holding to like a non-causal, like, being that is replacing
No.
the necessary
Beings are
being,
like
or
concrete. No.
not
Beings,
non-causal thing that replaces,
yeah,
or
like a metaphysical principle.
a non-causal thing.
Yeah, like a
Okay,
principle or
but that doesn't.
like a law of
So that would
logic or
be the
something.
that does it exist? This non-causal thing within this worldview.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so if with Parmenides, he's saying with what he's saying there, at least nothing can exist. So at least one thing would have to exist. So the non-causal thing existing would satisfy that. So the explanation you're giving here wouldn't explain why, like, let's say the non-causal thing is Y, it wouldn't explain how X was created. Because all it's holding
I'm
to
not
is that
saying
at
X
least
was
one thing
created.
needs to exist.
I'm
Okay.
not saying it
So
was created. I'm just saying why things could be.
are you
Like,
holding to like there were things that were always existing and then those
yeah,
things
like,
were ultimately just created everything else?
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's open. Like, it could be the case that everything. Well, I guess on Parmenides' account, it would have to be eternal. So yeah, I guess I should go with that. So
Okay.
yeah, things exist because they exist of metaphysical necessity.
And these things aren't necessary beings. They would have potential, these eternal things.
Yeah, I would reject an Aristotelian account of change, potential actual language like that. I think the
Why?
Aristotelian metaphysics is like outdated and confused.
Why does potential and actual not work?
So when you're talking about what you're trying to
Well,
do
actually,
is
real quickly.
explain. Okay.
So, real quickly, actually, we don't even have to get into this. To stay more on topic, right?
Yeah.
So the things that are existing eternally, they're contingent things.
Well, we're
Right.
gonna have to get us in the next one anyway, because like premise 6
Yeah.
and 7 is about pure act
Yeah.
and stuff. So maybe we should just go ahead and get on into
Well,
it.
real quickly, if you're holding that these eternal things that created everything else that have always existed, they're contingent things, right?
I'm not saying they're created.
Contingent. Its existence is dependent on something
Like
else. That's
existence,
external.
like things existing would be necessary. Now they could. Parmenides wouldn't like this, but yeah, I could affirm that they undergo change.
Are
There's no
these
problem with
eternal
that.
things that created everything else? Are they contingent or are they necessary?
So yeah, that would be necessary, metaphysically necessary.
Okay, so they're like their existence is grounded in their own nature. They're not dependent on like external cause or anything else.
I would say probably like even non-being things like laws or abstracta, nomology, anything is probably going to be grounded. If what we take grounding to mean as like in virtue of a way thing can be, then I'm probably going to say that that is everything that I can think of is going to be grounded by logic, including God if he were to exist. But
Okay. The laws of logic wouldn't be necessary beings. They would be necessary truths in the sense that they're hold true in every possible world.
yeah, possible worlds are as big as you can get possible worlds is to say that all worlds in which the laws of logic obtain. To deny that, you'd have to affirm impossible worlds or something.
Yeah. Okay. So you're holding to these eternal things that are necessary. That's perfect.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's a
Or, like,
possible.
Well,
Or
you
it's
said
probably even a plausible
for them to
explanation.
be like eternal. Like, didn't you say that they would have to be necessary in this scenario?
For what to be eternal?
With the scenario we're giving, with like these eternal,
The material,
eternal
like the
things
being,
that
like
that created
the
everything else.
laws or the logic or all of it.
Within your worldview, where there's like a non-causal,
This isn't my
sufficient
worldview.
reason, or the hypothetical worldview,
Yeah.
where there's this non-causal sufficient reason, and then there's these things that have eternally existed that were caused everything else to exist. Didn't you say that
Well, they're non-causal explanations, so they wouldn't cause anything to exist. It's a non-causal explanation.
How did things get like come into existence?
They didn't come into existence. It would be eternal.
So like you and I, were we eternal?
No.
Okay. And we would go back, and ultimately there would have to be something that is eternal.
I mean, on this, it would just be like being is eternal, or existence, or something,
what do you define
or reality.
Being.
What is?
Because like being, from my understanding, being is just that which exists.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
we can
being
go with
would be like
existence.
a thing that exists.
Yeah, Yeah, things that exist always exist on this view.
So you and I exist, so we always existed.
No, I said things that always exist, or
So
there are always exist. No. There are, well, yeah, there is that too, but there, in terms of like material things. I mean, this could be any world, but we can just make it easy and simplify and say material. Like, there's always material things that exist. Not that every material thing exists, but there's always something material existing. The laws would be non-material,
so
but they
even
would
within
also
this,
exist.
you're affirming that there's things that eternally exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Well, yeah. If you mean by things, we were talking about like the
being,
laws.
Being.
There's always being.
Exists. There's something that exists that's eternal.
Yeah, there's always something that exists.
And this caused everything else.
No.
Well, if it's
a non-causal explanation.
Well, the non-causal explanation doesn't explain how we came into existence. Remember, we went through that.
Oh yeah, the change.
I explained like ultimately, if we keep going back, there would have to be something that caused everything else that always existed. Because if it didn't always exist, then the non-causal thing couldn't be the explanation of existence. We went through this. So you affirmed that there was something that existed that created everything else that was eternal.
No.
We just
didn't create anything. Okay, it's uncreated. It's eternal. If it's eternal, it's uncreated.
Okay. No, I mean that. So with the non-causal thing being the eternal thing, let's take you and I. We came into existence. We're not eternal. You already affirmed that.
Also, we probably wouldn't exist in this possible world, but assuming we did exist in that possible world.
Something previous to
I can accommodate that
us,
too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. Is this just an infinite regress of previous things that created us?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you would be violating PSR, right? Because it's just an infinite regress sufficient of contingent reasons.
Well, one is like, in this world, it could be necessitarian, but I'll accept that it's contingent. But yeah, what's the argument that this world violates PSR?
Yeah, well, if it's an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons, then the ultimate chain, the chain is totality, is just contingent. So it doesn't explain its own existence.
The chain is explained by being exists of metaphysical necessity. Yeah, the totality of like temporal things is explained by the metaphysical principle that being is.
It's the sufficient reasoning for the contingent, the infinite regress is a metaphysical principle.
Principle, yeah.
Okay, and what is that metaphysical principle?
That what is and what is not is unthinkable. Like it's impossible for nothing to exist.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that then an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons can exist. Like that wouldn't explain
I
that. Like there's other worldviews in which there isn't an infinite regress that's sufficiently fit that criteria of
Yeah.
that metaphysical principle you have. So that wouldn't be an explanation for the infinite regress of contingent sufficient reasons. That's just
And
like
nobody-
that's
No,
presupposing that there is an infinite regress of contingent sufficient reason. That's not an explanation of that.
Yeah,
And no-
I mean, okay, sorry.
Oh yeah,
Well,
I was
if you're gonna
just going to
say
say,
yeah,
and
then-
nobody on fire asked Bug if you're going to take a contingentarian stance. Don't you need to provide a reason for the assumption that things could have been otherwise? Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, the idea that something could exist otherwise is grounded in really something that couldn't exist otherwise is ultimately going to be grounded within like the laws of logic and those types of things. If it's impossible for the only way something couldn't have existed otherwise is if it would be a logical impossibility, that being it would violate a law of logic. But so like I could demonstrate even with myself that like for example, if I was born without a right arm, that's a logical possibility. It wouldn't violate, for example, the law of non-contradiction. So like that would be like the grounding or reason for the assumption that things could have been otherwise. But I think we've already believed that in contingent things, right, Howdy?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I could argue against that. What's funny is I could even argue against causation.
Well, like I
But
don't know why
that's-
you would be arguing against your own beliefs. You know what I mean?
No, I'm just saying, like, because we're just sort of probing the like probability of your argument being sound, and like all of these, alternatives. The more alternatives I lay out on the table, as long as they're like not refuted, they sort of decrease the probability of the soundness of the argument.
Yeah. Okay.
But I guess to move on more closely to the argument would be like, so I could give you my objections also to the Aristotelian account of change being like potential and actual. So like the goal of an analysis of change is to explain becoming or coming to be or passing to and from or transitioning in like change language. But the Aristotelian analysis explicates actuality and potentiality with the change language it should be attempting to render an analysis of. So you have to say things like potentials becoming actuals, or potentials coming to be actualized, or things passing from potential beings to actual beings, or of transitions from potency to act. So it's like explicitly circular, and it's not really providing an analysis of change.
Wait, what's circular? Like what specifically circular?
So an analysis of change is to explain becoming, coming to be, and transitions. And the Aristotelian analysis of change explains potentials and actuals in terms of becoming and coming to be and transitioning.
Okay, so well, like within Aristotelian metaphysics, like potency is just defined as something has the capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing. And actuality is just the realized state of the potentia, or something that already is what is, but it is potentially able to be. So like with those definitions there, right? How would potential and actual, like the reason I would affirm that potential and actual potency and actuality would have to exist in a worldview where you affirm change exists is because if you deny, let's take potency, for example. If you deny potency, you're saying, let's say X has the potential to become hot, right? If you're saying potency does not exist, you're denying that something has the capacity to become something else, but it's not yet that thing. So you're denying that X has the capacity or ability to become hot. And if you're affirming this worldview where it does change and X becomes hot, you're violating a law of logic because you're saying at P, it can become hot, not P, it can't become hot.
Just really like, I hate to be like meta commentary, but like you seriously think denying like Aristotelian metaphysics of change entails like a contradiction? Is that the argument?
Well, I just demonstrated how the denial if you affirm a worldview in which change occurs and you deny that potential exists, it would violate the law of non-contradiction.
Sure. I would love to see an argument for that one day, maybe.
I just provided it.
Okay, I'm gonna pass over that. So, did you you use the word becoming, right, in that analysis, or no?
What do you mean becoming? I
Yeah,
said
you said like if something
X
has the
the potential to
potential
become hot,
to become hot. Yeah, so you use the
yeah.
word become in your analysis.
and X becomes hot. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So again, my critique is that the analysis of change is an analysis of what it means to become, and you're using the word become in your analysis of potential, because that's why it's circular.
Well, you could say X has the potential to, like, how would that be?
What
an
does it mean?
invalid
What does it mean to
analysis?
have potential? I mean,
something has
there's
the
no
capacity
such
to
thing
become
as
something else, but is not yet that thing.
Yeah. Because an analysis of change is an attempt to explain becoming, and your analysis of becoming in terms of potential references the word becoming to explicate itself. So it's circular.
Okay, and real fast, that's the initial hour. We have 20 additional minutes from Super Chats. If y'all are enjoying the conversation, feel free to submit a Super Chat with a question for your debaters or a comment, and that'll get displayed on the screen or asked or stated. We have 40 additional extension minutes available from Super Chat still, so if you're enjoying the debate or you want to hear more, this is a good time to get Super Chats in. I'm starting the additional 20 minutes right now.
Yeah. So wait, where's the circularity here?
You're explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming.
Okay. And potential. Okay. Yeah. Well, to become something, I would say I'm explaining becoming in terms of potential and potential in terms of becoming. Well, I don't see the logical problem with that.
No, it's just a bad analysis because it's circular. It's also implausible because it assumes ontological pluralisms and the felicity of eternalism, but yeah, that's a bad theory. So I can give you like a modern theory. One of them would be like the at theory, where x changes if and only if x is f at time t naught and not f at time t1, and x persists from t naught to t1. Okay. It's like a modern metaphysics of change.
Yeah. Okay. Well, potency. Okay, potency isn't defined in like in the analogy I gave. It's not defined in terms of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Potential is defined in terms of being, that which exists. Like,
what's your definition of potential?
Is derived from like the prior distinction between potential and actual. Potency,
what's your definition of
something has the something has the capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing.
Did you use the word become in that analysis?
Yes.
You're right. So it's circular.
Even then, I don't see how it's logically invalid, though. You could just affirm that it's like a tautology.
Well, logical, validity is really briefly, though. Validity has to do with like arguments and whether or not they use like rules of inferences that are valid, like modus ponens or modus tollens. So if any, like your argument's invalid, right? The analyses aren't valid or invalid. They can just be like either like incoherent or just like bad theories or analyses.
I mean, you could just say potential to heat up, and then X heats up. Yeah. And then you could do P, it can heat up.
We're going in circles on circularity. Maybe you can go back because wasting time.
You just remove becoming. So X has the potential to heat up. Your affirming change occurs and X heats up, but you're denying potential exists, i.e. something having the capacity to become something else. So you're denying that in this scenario that
I don't deny that things have capacities. That's just not what potentials are in the Aristotelian metaphysic.
Okay. Well, from how I define potential and actual, would you affirm that, like, that understanding.
Things have the capacity for change, like you're saying,
So
like
potential
dispositions
something has the
exist?
capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing. Actuality.
Yeah, I
is
reject
just what
that
you want.
analysis because it's a bad analysis because it's circular. And it's also implausible because it
How is
assumes
it circular?
ontological. It also assumes ontological pluralism and assumes the felicity of eternalism. It's also unparsimonious. And there's also readily available plausible alternatives that like fucking blow Aristotelian metaphysics out of the water, like the ad theory of change. But again, I reject it because it's circular. It's just a bad analysis.
Okay, where's the circularity?
Because you're explaining potential, or you're explaining becoming in terms of potential, and potential in terms of becoming,
I didn't
or
even
transitions in terms
I
of
didn't even
potency and
use
act.
become in
The
my
last thing you said
scenario
used
of
that word
changing.
becoming.
X,
So, all right,
X has the potential.
give
to
me your
heat up.
analysis of
The change
change.
occurs
Okay,
X.
X. Let's write it out. X changes if and only if. X changes if and only if. Okay, what's your analysis of change?
Okay, change is the
You-
move from
you
a state
goober.
of potential to actual.
Moving from a state to a state, moving from a state of potential to a state of actual. You remember when I said things coming from potential beings to actual beings? That's part of the analysis of change, or that's the words or the language that analyses of changes are attempting to explicate. And again, your analysis of change is using the language it's attempting to explicate, to explain potential and actual. So it's circular. And this is why it's rejected by modern metaphysics.
Okay.
When you say moving from, when you use the words from and to, that's change language.
And
you're explaining.
The point is, it's explaining how change occurs. Change. It's possible for change to occur because something has potential, and then it moves.
Yeah, and it changes, right?
That's what change is.
Yeah, change is change. Great. That's an amazing analysis, dude.
Well, that's just a tautology.
Yeah, it's an awful analysis. Yes. This is why no one accepts it.
Do you disagree that change is change?
I think that that's an awful analysis. That's like saying change is like a primitive notion. You're saying that there is no analysis of change, in which case we would also jettison Aristotelian metaphysics anyway, because then change would be a primitive.
How did I provide no analysis of change?
I'm not saying you didn't. I'm saying it's a bad analysis. Or when you say change is change, that's a tautology. That's just a bad analysis. It's not an analysis. An analysis is when you have analysandum and analysans, where you explicate the analysandum in terms of analysans, like other terminology. So again, an ad theory of change would be X changes if and only if X is F at time T0 and not F at time T1, and X persists from T0 to T1. Doesn't use any change language, right?
So, okay, so from that, right? Your problem is in describing what change is. I'm using the terms from and to.
Partially that, but also like how are you defining potential and actual is also going to include change language as well.
So something has the capacity to become something else, but is not yet that thing.
That's not Aristotelian metaphysics, but like you can redefine potential and actual. Like maybe what you mean by potential is what everyone else means by disposition, right? But
well, like
that's not Aristotelian metaphysics.
With my definition, if you agreed with that and you disagreed with that understanding, you said it wouldn't work. So you would affirm then that my understanding of potential and actual.
Not sure. You said a thing has potential is just to say that a thing has like dispositions.
No, potential.
And what do you mean by actual?
Is just something has the capacity to become something else, but it's not yet that thing. Actuality is just the realized state
to become.
Of
yeah, well, yeah. When you say become, yeah, then it's another level of circularity because becoming is change language. Again, try not to use becoming or coming to be or passing from and to or transitions. There's also other change languages too, but those are like the main ones that a theory of change would be trying to render an analysis of, right? Speaking of circularity, we're going in circles. Let's talk about principle of, let's see what we got on principle of proportionate causality.
Yeah.
So, what's your argument against emergent phenomena?
Yeah,
Or do you have
apparent
one?
emergent phenomena
Mhm.
doesn't mean that like that's actually what's happening. It's just
Right.
what it appears to be the case, or with our current knowledge.
Mhm.
I would justify, like, if the rejection of PPC would be a violation of PSR.
Sure. Are you intelligent?
Like, you agree with that?
No. But are you
No.
intelligent?
Sure. Like,
Are your atoms intelligent?
I don't know. Not in the same way of
Right.
like being conscious. I don't
Right.
believe that.
Imagine,
No.
right?
That's
We
not
walk
what
up
I'm
to
saying.
people and
Is
say,
it
"Hey, here's my
possible that
theory."
consciousness can be not grounded in something physical, but could be,
Sure.
like, for example, okay.
Well,
So this
it depends what we mean
presupposes,
by
like, this
grounded.
physical
Not
sense.
totally grounded. Not totally
Like,
grounded. It's
well,
probably
like,
partially grounded.
this is
Because I don't think you can be
presupposing
conscious without like a body.
within, obviously within the Christian paradigm, we believe that there's consciousness outside of a body. It doesn't necessitate.
Now, there's
the thing.
Christian physicalists. You don't have a stranglehold on
Within the
dualism.
Eastern Orthodox position, we hold that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For the principle of proportionate causality, we've already explained what that is. If you were to deny,
actually, let's see if you know what that is. Do you know what a
I've
formal?
already
okay.
Oh,
do you? Let me see your definition.
I even explained it in my intro.
Yeah. So maybe I forgot. What do you think let me see. Formally, to possess in the exact manner or kind as it appears in the effect. So it's like a phenomenal analysis.
No,
like
something formally is just like the cause, what's in the effect. The cause actually has that. So, like, let's say the effect, the effect has X.
Yeah.
If you're talking about it formally, the cause.
Well, the effect is X. Is probably a better way of saying it, but yeah, it's like identical reinstantiation, or like if you read like Phaser, he'll say things like for like, or other like ways of this is like abscission and inheritance. What do you think the difference between virtually and let me see your definition? Do I have those? Virtually, to have the power or capacity to produce it either from external sources or by possessing it in potentia. Seed virtually.
Yeah, there's two understandings.
A tree. Okay. Oh, here's one. Eminently, to possess in a higher or superior way. What does that mean? That's interesting.
Yeah, in the sense of to, like, you possess the let's say, like, we imagine X attribute as a spectrum where there's levels to it. Let's be like X, there's base level 1, then 2, then 3. The eminent form for, let's say, level 1 would be level 2 and 3. For level 2, it'd be level 3. The way we would just determine eminence is something eminent is like ontological. It would be tied in with ontological superiority.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You're saying just like the properties in a thing are like maximally in the cause, like the property of the effect is maximally in cause.
Possesses that thing in a higher or more superior way. So, like, even with goodness, right? Like, let's say X. Let's just say there's goodness, right? The effect possesses goodness at level 1, and the cause possesses it at level 3. The cause can produce an effect with level 1 goodness because it possesses goodness eminently or in a higher, more superior way than the effect. But if, like, the cause, let's say, had 0 goodness, or let's say 1 goodness, and the effect had 2 goodness, the cause wouldn't be the sufficient reasoning for the goodness and the effect.
Hold on, I have to respond to a comment. It's eminent with E-M-I-N-E-T, like E-M-I-N-E-N-T. It's not like imminent like inherence, or like imminent as in like right now. It's like you can think of like preeminent, like sort of like anyways. So what was the argument against the possibility of emergent phenomena?
Yeah. With denying with rejecting the principle of proportionate causality, you'd be holding to a position in which the like the cause produces an effect out of nothing.
It
Which
produces
would
a
violate this
property.
property.
All right.
or
So is
effect
water
out
is
of
water
nothing.
wet? Does water have the property of being wet or wetness?
Like, well, why?
It's an example of emergent phenomena. That's
Yeah,
a
but
counterexample
like
to your
just
position.
if it appears that way, that doesn't mean that's actually the case. It's just like an
So water
apparent
is not wet.
observation. The same
So
way,
water is
like
not
for
wet on your
example,
view.
of like there can be a magician in which it appears
water-
as if he made something disappear, but it doesn't actually disappear. It's just observationally.
So water is not wet in reality on your view.
Well, I'm just saying, like with these examples of emergent phenomena,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It can appear as if this is the case, but it doesn't mean it's actually the case. Especially
Water's
if
not wet.
you could ground, for example, that rejecting the principle of proportionate causality violates the law of non-contradiction, which I would do, because if you violate PSR, I can show how a rejection.
Sure, because it's using words like that aren't in the conclusion or using words in the conclusions that aren't in the premises. So it's like straightforwardly invalid. Like I could be charitable and I can sort of understand like what you're trying to say, but like it's obviously like formally invalid. But
Okay,
what's your next one?
Let's take
P1.
for conclusion one. What? Let's start with that. Where's the? How is this invalid right here? Premise 1 through 4 to conclusion 1.
Right. What's the inference rule for conclusion 1?
I was just using a modus ponens in which P is accumulation of premise 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And nobody on fire said time support for the channel, so y'all do have a little bit of time left still. But if y'all are enjoying the debate, please consider submitting a super chat. There's still about 30 minutes available on the extension time.
Yeah. So in the first conclusion, you're using a phrase called necessary being that doesn't appear in any of the premises. So it's like just straightforwardly invalid.
Okay.
And what's the inference rule? You said it's a conjunction of premises 1 through 5. It's a modus tollens of the. What was your inference rule?
I said it was modus ponens.
Modus ponens, and what's the modus ponens of?
Because with C1, how because I use the term necessary being, does it mean that it doesn't follow?
That's absolutely what it means. You have to use the words of the conclusion in your premises, or it's going to be invalid.
In accordance to what? Like, why does that make it invalid?
Because, like, modus ponens is like P implies Q, P therefore Q. So you need Q somewhere in your premises, right? That's the form of the inference.
Why? Because
of the form of an inference rule. So for specifically the form of modus ponens is P implies Q, P therefore Q. So Q has to appear in one of your premises. And insofar as a necessary being isn't in any of your premises, then it's straightforwardly invalid.
Why is that the case? Why does that mean it's invalid though? Like, for example,
because
if premise
a valid rule of inference.
If premise 1 through 4, if you were to affirm those, then that would lead to you in affirming a necessary being. But it doesn't. And then the conclusion 1 affirms that there would then be a necessary being. Why would that make it completely invalid?
Yeah, what's the inference
1 through 4 don't say the term.
Because valid arguments have to use valid rules of inference. So what's the valid rule of inference?
Yeah, what makes it not logically follow? Like it. So, for example, what's
how rule of inference? If it's not a rule of inference, it's invalid.
Let's take the Bible,
Yeah.
right? Let's say, given that the Bible teaches the Trinity, right? Even though the Bible doesn't use the word Trinity, it still would be if it does teach the concept of the Trinity, and that's just the term we're using to describe that would be logic.
Yeah.
That would be logically valid.
So logical validity is just to use valid inferences. So you're going to have to supply the inference, and in whatever you supply as your rule of inference, the form of the argument is going to have to follow that form. So for modus ponens, it's P implies Q, P therefore Q. So Q has to appear in the conditional in premise 1.
So, and Kurt has a question for Bug. Bug, do you hold the PSR as self-evident or axiomatic, or is it justified by the existence of a deity?
I would say like, well, it depends how you take axiomatic. Like, you could say PSR is axiomatic in the sense that its rejection within violate the law of non-contradiction is dependent on the law of non-contradiction. But you could also say in some sense PSR is self-evident if you're saying that the law of non-contradiction is self-evident and anything violating it, in that sense, you could say PSR is self-evident. Howdy. So you've stepped. Like,
That's hilarious, by the way.
Within your understanding of logic, right?
Logic,
this is how it's this.
You have to use like rules of inference.
Yeah.
So
does that make it like
but you sort of have to use
is
rules
this
of
objectively
inference.
the case then that this doesn't logically follow, or is it just in like your preferred understanding or formatting?
So anyone with like a cursory understanding of argumentation and validity is going to immediately discern that modus ponens is not being employed because it doesn't follow the format of it.
And this.
So maybe when you're
like,
trying to, and also when you're saying like,
case, or is this just in like your world that you're understanding?
I'm saying anyone who. So what I mean by validity, maybe you mean something different. Maybe by validity you mean tastes like strawberry ice cream. Again, because you probably like you have like super proprietary language, right, that no one else uses in the field because like you just watch apologists and sort of parrot what they say without looking into any of it. But when I mean validity, I mean that the rules of inferences are valid inferences like modus ponens or modus tollens or like disjunctive syllogism or things like that follow truth tables. Now, you might mean something different when you say valid, like maybe the argument makes you feel good or something, but that's not what I mean. That's not what logicians mean. That's not what anyone in the literature means. So maybe we're just speaking past each other, but insofar as that's what I mean by validity, your argument is straightforwardly invalid.
With this argument, the modus ponens here, obviously modus ponens is if P is true, therefore Q. The P would be the accumulation of premises 1 through 4. The Q is conclusion 1, right? If so, then you would just format it. If P, that being premise 1, 2, 3, and 4 are true, therefore Q. P is true, therefore Q.
I expected a little bit more.
What,
but okay.
Can you show me like why with a modus ponens Q would need to be in the premise for it to be valid?
Because
why couldn't
the
P
form
be the premise
of modus
and then
ponens
Q be the conclusion, and then it just be formatted where if P is true, therefore Q. P is true, therefore Q.
Right. So modus ponens is P implies Q, P therefore Q. That's an inference, right? But you're not doing that in your argument. That's why it's invalid.
I am though. I'm just not rewriting. Okay. I'm not writing out. So
it's just not. It's modus ponens, but just not in the form of modus ponens. That's cool.
Hold up. Let me share my screen.
And real fast, there's a super chat question from Karen Dave. Buglovesall, if you have a totally alternative construction of logic than the one we were sharing, could you please share it? The audience is lost. Great question. Thank you.
Wait, my construction of logic, it's the same as his. Like, look, can you give me permission to share my screen or like pull me up? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So all he's saying here is with the modus ponens, it's if P then Q. P is true, therefore Q. The P here would be these 4 premises. Premise 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the P. If this P is true, therefore Q. Q is conclusion 1. Right? So this is what it would just be formatted, right? If P then Q. P is true, therefore Q. That's logically valid. Really, his complaint is that I didn't put like conclusion 1 over here with like with an arrow for the Q, so then it would read out left to right. If P then Q, P is true, therefore Q. Like it's not, the argument's not actually logically invalid.
And Shadowslave says equating God with any part of reality means you need to prove how it's the same. Example: God is reality, saying God is outside of space and time is the same as saying God does not exist. How is God real? Thank you for the super
Equating
chat.
God with any part of reality means you need to prove how it's the same. What? God is reality. Saying God is outside of space and time is the same as saying God does not exist. Okay, well, the entire argument with saying God is outside of space and time is to say God does not exist is just like definitional. You're just defining that something outside of space and time doesn't exist. It's not like it doesn't mean in reality he doesn't exist in the sense of like to be an act, right? It's purely definitional. You could do that with anything. I could say like to be part of reality means you exist in act and you're also not Howdy. So with that being said, Howdy doesn't actually exist in reality. Like technically that's true, but it's only definitionally valid. Like it doesn't really prove anything.
P therefore Q. And so Q has to appear as a conditional in one of the premises. Insofar as your argument does not have that, your argument's invalid.
Why does it have to show up in one of the premises? Why can't it be like, for example, if we
That's
look
what
here,
it means to be valid.
if P
Yeah, validity
then
just
Q,
means like you feel good
P
about
is
it,
literally
right?
just premise 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So,
What do you
like,
think? Actually, let me ask you, what do you think validity
hold on.
means?
I'm explaining something.
Because
This is
obviously it's not
P.
adherence to
This
valid
is
rules
P.
of inference.
This is
so
Q,
what is
right?
Yeah.
All we're saying, all you want me to do is take this and like, let's say there's like a bubble here. You want me to put this. If P, that being this, that's this bubble. Therefore Q, that's this
point of
bubble,
moderation.
Q,
Is
and
your
that's
name
what
on there
this is gonna be.
Admiral Wamper?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the second bubble, right? If P then Q. P is true, therefore Q. That's what you want me to do, right?
I'm saying if you want it to be valid, you're going to have to use valid rules of inferences. So
that's literally just
sure,
a format. That's not the actual thing being invalid.
Yeah, what do you think validity?
That's just,
what do you think
you
validity
want me
is?
to like
what do you think validity
reorganize it.
is? What do you think validity is?
Well, validity is determined by using valid inference rules. I agree,
All right,
but I don't see how this isn't a valid modus ponens.
Oh, that's not a. First of all, okay. You're saying that this is the form of a modus ponens, or is it? Or is it not?
I'm saying that this is a valid modus ponens. This being P, this is Q. All this is stating is that if P is true, therefore Q.
No, it would be P implies Q, P therefore Q. I've said this
P
like
is
5
true,
times.
Therefore Q, right? But P is just equivalent to this. Q is just this.
Yeah, you could say like if 1 through 4, then 5, 4, therefore 5 or something, but...
Yeah, this is a valid modus ponens, right?
No. I mean, maybe you could make it into one, but it's not.
How would this not be a valid modus ponens?
Because a modus ponens is of the form P implies Q, P therefore Q.
Okay, so how does... So when we, from your understanding, right?
Yeah, it's just my understanding.
No, I'm asking something. From your understanding, something to be logically valid has to be an inference rule, and then it has to be formatted in this specific way. Like the way I'm doing it, this is wouldn't...
Invalid, yeah. That would be... Yeah, that's absolutely invalid.
Okay. So right here, I fixed it. So P I'll even clarify. P is just equivalent to premise 1 through 4. Q is just equivalent to conclusion 1, right?
Yeah.
That's right here. If P is true, therefore Q. Or then if P is true, then Q. P is true, therefore Q.
All right.
Or let's do if P then Q. There's your valid modus ponens.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So it wasn't that this was invalid. You just wanted it formatted this specific way.
I'm not sure what you think validity means.
You had a problem with
The form of the
Okay,
argument, yeah, the structure.
It still means
well, I
the
don't have a
exact
problem
same
with
thing.
it.
You just
I don't have
wanted
a
me to
problem
write
with it.
this out.
I don't have a problem with it. I think it's like cute and endearing, but yeah, for an
Do you
argument
think
to
I'm
be
cute and
valid,
endearing?
it has to be of a valid form. Dubious because it is like somewhat similar to the language that other people use, so that would surprise me.
And Shadow Slays says validity. I cannot read. Validity means using validity to make it valid. Believers need validation, therefore Sky Daddy validates them. Thank you for the tongue twister, Shadow Slays.
Yeah. By the way, since this is how you wanted it formatted. This formatting is literally right here.
Sure. Also, since we're running out of time, you think God
You
is
got
actus
18
purus
minutes right now.
Oh, so you think God is actus purus?
I think he's correct. Yeah.
Are you aware that's like heretical in Eastern Orthodoxy?
It's not what. Okay, what like dogmatic teaching does?
There's also 8 additional minutes available from super chats, or maybe I miscounted that. I'll double check it. Something like that, though.
Because you have to affirm the essence energy distinction and that the energies of God are God. And that you participate in them through hesychasm and the divine energy.
How does
theosis.
How does EED? Like
8 minutes available still.
Like contradict EED.
Are the energies of God God?
I mean, okay. Honestly, this is a completely different explanation.
Right.
Do you know what a formal actual distinction is?
Do I know? Can you speak up?
Do you know what a formal actual distinction is?
A formal actual distinction? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what we affirm.
Although I would prefer to use the terms like rationally distinct if we're going to get into that. But
well, I mean that's the technical term for what we affirm. I can give you like a document on it after stream if you want.
Okay. Are you a catechumen or did you get through the catechesis?
I've completed my catechesis.
Okay. So how much actually I don't want to be rude, but I do have a question because I did want to get into some like inter-Christian type stuff. So are you aware of like the distinctions between like perichoresis and economia?
Yes.
Actually, let me ask you this first to sort of test your...
Well, how is this relevant?
Oh, I think the doctrine of divine simplicity compromises Christianity. Because God can't enter into any real relations with creation, such that in actuality, Jesus Christ is not your Savior or your Lord, and also was not crucified, buried, and resurrected. In fact,
that's not even the topic.
On your view
of the debate, dude, this is a red herring.
Right. Well, it's not really red herring, and it is sort of relevant to the debate.
The topic
because it
is on my
argument
God. For God's existence, and you're debating me on divine simplicity.
Well, you think God is simple, so obviously it's going to turn on whether or not divine simplicity is true. You want to go back to me beating you over the head on validity? I guess we can go back to that if you like.
I mean,
But I was trying to like progress the conversation a little bit.
You affirmed my my update, right?
Well, I mean,
you already affirmed my update. It wasn't even an update because it's written right here. I literally just repeat.
Nobody in fire says, "Let there be blood." A little more. The $8 super chat to maximize the time.
I don't want Howdy to bleed. That's not very nice.
Do you think is Jesus your savior formally or in actuality?
It's
you can't even believe the gospel on your doctrine of divine simplicity, by the way.
Yeah, that's a completely different debate topic.
Is Jesus your savior in reality or not?
Yes. In reality.
All right, then he can possess relations. He can inhere in relations with creation. So you reject divine simplicity. Thank you.
How does that reject divine simplicity? What do you take divine simplicity to mean?
So divine simplicity, the relevant part of divine simplicity is that God cannot possess any accidental properties or relations. So God can't enter into relations with anything. Not real relations, like maybe you could say formal relations, but then you'd have to
You know
say that
what?
Jesus is your savior only formally.
I know a guy that would love to debate you on this topic. I can set you up. Apophatic.
Sure.
This is his
Yeah,
bread and
apophatic
butter.
theology. So what's your
He actually
response
affirms
though?
absolute divine simplicity.
Oh, so maybe what you mean by divine
Let's keep it
simplicity
on
is something
topic
different.
or around the topic and not on other people. Other people are not involved in the debate right now. This is 1v1.
So is Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior formally or
No,
actually?
you heard him. We got to stay on topic.
Well, around the topic, right? This is more loose in the second half, but we're not going to talk about other people, right?
What? No.
Because if you affirm divine simplicity, he can't be a relata of any real relation, including being your Lord or Savior, or being crucified even. But so yeah, on divine simplicity, you don't believe the gospel. So maybe that's something we should think about.
Interesting.
Do you have a response? What's your response?
Oh, like this wasn't a debate.
Okay.
I was just kind of letting you talk about it.
Is your God divinely, like, is what you're trying to prove something that can have real relations with anything or possess accidental properties? Is that the God you're trying to prove?
I was just proving.
Is that what you mean by God?
By God, I mean fully actualized conscious first mover.
And when you say fully actualized, can a fully actualized being have real relations with anything?
I don't know, man. Damn it.
Nice.
Like, I mean, that's like, that's not even part of the argument addressing that.
Well, it absolutely is, because you're saying what was because you're saying causation. Because part of your argument includes causation, or does it not?
Part of it does include causation. Yeah.
Do you think God caused in your argument is part of the argument? Does it have to be the case that God created anything, or no?
Yeah.
Or caused, or let me instead of saying created, let me say caused.
Yeah.
Is it part of the argument that God causes anything?
Are you holding that a pure act being can't create?
It can't cause anything.
What do you mean by cause?
For me, when I say cause, I mean stand in a causal relation. That means to be causal, a causal relata. So like A causes B, that's a relation.
How do you define causal relation?
Let me pick a.
Because that was like pretty.
I'll give you. Hold on. Let me give you an analysis.
You're getting real close to that circular definition. A cause is.
I haven't given you a definition of cause.
And a causal relation.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's a relation, and it's to cause is to stand in a causal relation. That's absolutely true. Anyone with any familiarity with causation is going to affirm that. That's not circular.
You're
that's
using
just
the word though. Like, what's a causal relation?
Right, I'm about to give you one definition of it. I actually prefer the counterfactual, right? So if we're doing a connectionist account, right, it would be that P immediately causes Q. If and only if had P not occurred, Q would not have occurred. Although maybe I want to go for an explanationist counterfactual where it's like if P and Q are truths of the appropriate kind, and the truth that P causally explains the truth that Q, then the causal explanatory fact consists in the fact that Q would not have been true if P had not been true, i.e. not P implies necessarily not Q, using the Stalnaker-Lewis subjunctive conditional.
Okay. W. Gish Gallup.
That's an analysis of...
but,
I can slow it. Like, you're not going to be tracking it anyway. If P
you know what?
And Q are truths
a little slower
of an appropriate kind, and
going too
the
fast. You
truth
gotta go a little slower.
that P causally explains the truth that Q, then that causal explanatory fact consists in, here's the analysis, the fact that Q would not have been true if P had not been true. That is to say, not P necessarily implies not Q. That's a counterfactual conditional analysis of causation. You want some more?
So
I
that's
can
how
give you like
you
the
define
nomological
what causal
deductive.
relation means.
Yeah.
Okay. And how would a pure act being not be able to cause?
Because a pure act being cannot have accidental properties.
How would that mean that he can't cause?
Because being in a real relation with anything is an accidental property.
Being in a real relation is an accidental property.
Well, I guess it could be an essential property, but for the purposes of this, it would be an accidental property, unless you're like an emanationist or something. But in
So
this
you're
case, it would be.
you're affirming like that a God for like a necessary being to exist and be pure act, it would have to at least have like, you know how we have the Trinity, like at least two
To be
persons,
pure
two
act,
hypostases.
like if you
Are
read
you, hold on,
Aquinas, right? Go
are
ahead.
you affirming that for a necessary being to be pure act, it would need to have two hypostases?
For anything to be pure act, it can't have accidental properties because it can't
So
change.
it would need at least one other hypostasis, so that then it wouldn't be an accidental property, and it would have like a relation
Yeah.
kind of within itself. I mean,
Or
so with
something
that,
over
like,
there.
could you go one further and even prove the Trinity? Like, argue for the Trinity now from here? Or are we only
No,
stuck
I'm
at two?
if you're asking me what my analysis or my interpretation of the New Testament authors as well as the Old Testament authors, I
No, I meant
absolutely
like
reject the Trinity.
here you basically argue that this God would have to have two hypostases.
Yeah, so like if a necessary, well, there's two ways. Either you're a necessitarian where it's like an emanationist thing where like P emanates Q of necessity, but that would like it would like be itself or something.
Yeah. Honestly, I might add that then, that it would have to at least have two persons on the argument.
Well, I mean, well, there's no. First of all, you can't have real distinction in a DDS analysis of the Trinity, right? What you have to say is that the relations are real and the relations are identical to the essence, but the persons themselves are correlatively only rationally distinct. I just wanted to get that because he said he had another argument. I'm ready to write it down. Let's check this one out. You said you had an argument for something. You said like rejecting something rejects PSR or something entails like a contradiction. Actually, let me ask you this. What's your argument in support of the PSR? Like what justifies me? Like why should I accept
I would affirm,
this?
so the rejection of, if you reject PSR, then you'd be affirming that.
And by
that brute
PSR,
facts
you mean this
exist.
version of the PSR? Yeah. There'd be brute facts.
Yeah. And then there would be a violation of the law of non-contradiction in respect.
Oh
to
yeah, I remember
grounding,
this.
because-
You said Taco that brute facts entail a contradiction. Okay, brute facts entail a contradiction. So the conclusion would be that brute facts, right, implies some P and not P. That's the conclusion, right? So what's the argument? How are we going to get this? What's P1?
In respect to well, I don't have it like it's formal syllogism. The P and not P though would be in respect to rational grounding. They're given something that exists that with brute facts.
So there's rational
something
grounding
that
and
exists
not
does
rational
not have a
grounding.
grounding, and something that does not exist does not have a
Something
grounding.
something that exists does not have a grounding, and it is not the case that something that exists does not have a grounding. Is that the P and not P?
Some things that exist do not have a grounding, i.e. they exist as brute fact. Not P. Some things that that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Yeah, so a contradiction is, again, I'm sorry to press you on the form, right? But I'm a stickler for form. I'm sorry, but it's going to have to be like P and not P. So you could say something that exists does not have a ground, and it is not the case that something that exists does not have a ground.
Some
That's the
things that exist do
form
not
of a
have a
contradiction.
grounding. Some things that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Yeah, that's just not a contradiction.
How so?
So a contradiction is a statement of the form P and not P.
Yeah, that's
So you're
a
going
P
to
and
have to
not
say
P.
something here. So here's what you're going to
That's
have
a
to do.
P
You're
and
going to
it's
have to say
negation.
something. You're going to have to say something, and then you're going to have to say and then you're going to have to say not, and then you're going to have to say whatever you said again. So it's P and not P.
Yeah, it's just the negation of the P. The negation
Right.
of the P, that being some things that exist do not have a grounding, is that some things that do not exist do not have a grounding.
Some things that exist do not have a grounding. Is that P?
Yes.
So the P and not P, would that be something that exists, or some things, I guess, that exist? Wait, is it singular or plural? Something or some things?
Some things.
Some things that exist do not have a grounding, and then the and then the not, and then some things that exist do not have a grounding. So what's funny is this is the form of a contradiction, but it's not a contradiction because you're quantifying over a section such that the first predicate could apply to some of the section, and the second predicate could apply to another section. So I could say some people have red hats and some people do not have red hats, right? But obviously that would just mean that could be consistent. It just means to say that some people have red hats and some people don't. Not that an individual person has a hat and not a hat. So unless I'm misunderstanding, that's what I take your supposed alleged contradiction to mean. Or did you mean something else?
Yeah, I'm just saying in respect to rational grounding, there's no distinction between these two.
In respect to rational grounding, there is no distinction between things that have grounding and things that don't, or something?
Yeah, there's no rational distinction between the two. So, like,
so
I think
there being no rational distinction between two things is not a contradiction.
It's in that respect, P being that things exist without a grounding, then not P being things that do not exist without a grounding. There is. Well,
that's just not the form of a contradiction. You have to repeat exactly what you say for P twice. So it's P and not P.
I repeated this P and just the negation of the P.
So the negation would be not, and then you repeat it again.
Did you miss the things exist and the things do not exist part? Or?
So you're saying the contradiction is like some things exist and some things don't exist?
I'm saying the contradiction is in respect to rational grounding. There's no distinction between things that exist as brute facts and things that do not exist as brute facts.
So, in respect to rational grounding, I have no idea what that means, but there is no distinction between things that don't have grounding and things that have grounding, or things that exist and things that don't exist. Whatever contradiction. It's also the case that you're like quantifying opaquely because you're saying some things. So it's like, well, some people could have blue hats and some people could not have blue hats. That's not a contradiction.
I mean, ultimately, things exist without as a brute fact. Things do not exist as a brute fact.
When you say things, does that mean all things? When you say things, does that mean all things or no things?
Ultimately, if you reject PSR and affirm that things are grounded in brute facts, then yes, ultimately, all all things that exist
Oh,
would
so denying
ultimately
PSR
be
entails
ungrounded, and
all facts
things
are
that do
brute
not
and all
exist
facts
also
are.
ultimately ungrounded.
So denying PSR implies that all facts are brute and that all facts are explained.
That's not even what I said. I'm saying
Okay.
I said if you affirm brute facts and that things are
Mm-hmm.
ultimately ungrounded, then P, everything that exists is ultimately a brute fact, and everything that does not exist is ultimately a brute fact. There's no distinction between the two in respect to grounding in that sense.
Well, one, what's the argument for if I accept one brute fact, it implies that everything's a brute fact? And two, what's the argument that even if
Well, I'm just
everything
saying,
were a
if
brute
you
fact, what's the contradiction?
I was giving another form of what I
Mhm.
said, in which you affirm that everything exists as a brute fact, like things ultimately exist as a brute
Well, denying PSR doesn't entail you think everything's brute. It
fact.
means
No,
that
I was giving in the
you think
sense
that
of
there's
you
at least
reject
one brute.
PSR and you affirm that. That's why I said if you affirm that, then
If I affirm what?
everything that exists ultimately is grounded as a brute fact.
But I don't have
or
to
is a brute
affirm
fact.
that. But I don't have to
Yes,
affirm
but that's
that to
why there's
deny
the other form of
PSR.
the argument where it applies if there's at least just one brute fact. Because if you affirm there's no brute facts and not reject
So
PSR.
to deny PSR means there's at least one brute fact with respect to whatever the facts are that require sufficient explanation. Doesn't mean you think everything's brute. But even if
Yes,
it
that's why
did,
there's two forms of the argument.
sure. What's the
forms of
form that
the
says like if I think that one thing's brute, that then everything's brute? What's
No,
that argument like?
I was saying that if you believe that ultimately everything that exists doesn't have a grounding, it just exists as a brute
You don't have to
fact.
say that to deny PSR.
That's why it's an alternate worldview. That's not the normal P and not P that I gave you earlier. I was just saying.
I'm saying, what's the contradiction
another
from denying
worldview in which people
PSR?
just believe everything came about as a brute fact, or just
No, but you said denying PSR entails a contradiction.
Yes, and I gave you the P and not P for affirming even just one brute fact. And I was giving you an alternate
So I have
for
a
the
brute
worldviews that
fact.
affirm that everything just exists.
So I have a brute fact. What's the contradiction?
I gave the contradiction like 4 times, dude.
So the closest I got to a contradiction was that some
Is there
things that exist.
Is there a distinction between, in terms
And
of
that is
grounding?
time. Go ahead and finish up your statements, and then we'll go to the closing.
I just had one last question. In terms of grounding, between something that exists as a brute fact and something that does not exist as a brute fact, is there a distinction between the two, or do they both exist as brute facts?
Yeah, a brute fact is just a fact with no sufficient reason or an explanation, and then a non-brute fact is just a fact that is explained.
Yeah, so in that sense, between that thing that exists and doesn't exist, if they both exist and don't exist as brute facts, in terms of grounding, there's no distinction between the two, right?
That sounds like nonsense. I don't even understand what you're saying.
Well, we'll just end it there then.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and move into the conclusions. I put up a vote for tonight's master debater. It's got Howdy and Bug on there, so make sure you put in your votes for that. Bug, I'm putting you at the top of the screen there. You ready?
For my,
Your conclusion?
yeah.
You've got 8 minutes.
8 minutes, dude. Howdy, how long's your conclusion going to be?
8.
Dude. I mean,
7
I don't really
minutes
have a
and
conclusion
45
to work on.
seconds. You don't have a conclusion?
Not really.
Do you want to just say some stuff?
I just want to say that I like Howdy. He's a pretty cool guy. I appreciate y'all having me up here. And hopefully in the future we can get like an apophatic Howdy debate on divine simplicity, or a 2v2 going, which with apophatic and I and Kaka, you can pick the topic and whoever we debate. But yeah, appreciate y'all for having me.
Thank you for the great conclusion. And then Howdy, let me know when you're ready and I'll start your timer.
Yeah, you can go ahead and start it.
You've got 8 minutes.
So, yeah, it was a good bloodbath. Got a little spicy and fiery, but hopefully after the bloodbath, cooler heads can prevail and we can have a cordial sort of relationship where we're not, there's not a lot of animosity. Bugs, I think, I guess I can give him arguments against rejecting PSR, but he didn't even provide any, so I'll skip ahead. So we don't even know what the modal register of the contingency argument he's using is. We don't know what metaphysics of modality is being deployed. We don't know if he's talking about concrete possible worlds or abstract possible worlds, or even if he uses possible world semantics. We don't even have his interdiviner, and it's a little irritating. But anyways, so again, one thing that's interesting is he admitted that the validity of the cosmological argument is parasitic on the ontological argument because he thinks God has a sufficient explanation for his existence that's internal to his essence or nature. Also, I think he agreed with me that you can't really construct this totality of all contingent facts because it would self be a contingent fact and it would be an element of itself. Thankfully, we have axioms of regularity and foundation that sort of prevent this kind of nonsense. It's also probably a fallacy of composition anyways, even if it was some finite or non set containing itself sort of construction. But he also gave no justification that there can't be infinite chains other than the chain itself requires an explanation. But obviously the chain of explanation is explained by each of its members being out of me. But let's assume okay, I can fix up whatever this nonsense is, right? Even if the argument were to be valid, non-theists could still make the move. This is like Taco's move, that something that exists necessarily that causes something contingent could just be the singularity or any event that has a probability of unity, depending on how you cash out your modal scope and your modal metaphysics. But we don't even know what that is under his argument. But anyways, all contemporary proponents of cosmological arguments require additional arguments to show the entities whose existence established possesses divine attributes. But he just early on in the debate admitted that the cosmological arguments are parasitic on the ontological arguments, but the ontological argument is unsound. Unfortunately, I didn't get in time to get into that, but obviously if you think the ontological is unsound, then you have to reject anything that this guy's saying, if you can understand what he's saying. So I guess I can spend some time. Also, there's so many things you could push back on and reject. You could be a causal anti-realist, and there's arguments against anti-realism. John McTaggart Ellis has a pretty reasonable argument. You could be a causal anti-realist, right? Bertrand Russell or David Hume could reject all of this as well. They could say causation is a scientifically obsolete concept. Cause and effect or other causal relata don't appear in any fundamental laws of nature, nor do any verbs that would express causal relations. And his argument seemingly would require necessary connections between separate existences. But if causation is a relation between separate existences, then causation can't be a relation of necessitation by conceivability. This is David Hume's famous argument. And again, the problems of the Aristotelian metaphysics is that the goal of the analysis of change is to explain becoming and change language. But unfortunately, he has to define his terms that explain change language in terms of change language, like potentials becoming actuals or transitions. I gave him readily available plausible alternatives like the AT theory of change or non-Aristotelian causations like nomological, deductive, counterfactual, conditional, probability raising even. And also there's non-causal actualization objections within the Aristotelian metaphysics that non-causal explanations on the table for the actualizations of potential can be non-causal, like grounding or functional realization or structural or essentialist. Obviously a lot of non sequiturs, still the gap objection. I guess I can give the eternalist objection. So his argument assumes the felicity of this is that there is temporal change is the actualization of a potential, and there's temporal change, then sometimes are potential, but all times are actual. This is eternalism. So change is not the actualization of a potential. Obviously, eternalism has a lot of rational and empirical support. So GR is exceptionally empirically confirmed and defines space-time as a four-dimensional manifold. And also non-eternalist theories also have to posit privileged present moments, which run afoul of the relativity of simultaneity. There's also truths about the past and future, like dinosaurs existing in the past. And if you affirm a correspondence theory of truth, the past and future must exist for those propositions to correspond to reality. He didn't really get into a grace sequitur essay. And even if I granted all of that, there's still like well, I guess that would prove God if I'm a Christian, but I guess I'll skip over that. Pass over. I'm probably running out of time. What's my time anyway?
That is time right now.
All right.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much for the closing statements, y'all. I did put a link in the chat. Let's get some likes up, people. Keep slamming that like button. I saw there's some new people that joined in here. We did have a vote in the side chat, and Howdy was voted tonight's master debater out of 26 votes with 69% of the vote. Bug got 31% of the vote. So congratulations on your master debater title, Howdy.